Hello, everyone, and welcome to Current's webinar for In This Together. This is part of our special coverage of how public media stations are working together to improve audience service for their communities. I'm Karen Everhart, the managing editor of Current. My guests today are two executives with unique insights on mergers between public television and radio stations. Kevin Martin is president and CEO of Cleveland's Ideastream Public Media. It formed in 2001 from the merger of WVIZ-TV and WCPN-FM. Kevin has looked at station mergers from many different angles. In his previous jobs, he worked at CPB to encourage TV station mergers. He was also a top executive at joint licensees, including KQED and KERA. Scott Finn is the president and CEO of Vermont Public Radio and Vermont PBS. And these state networks completed public media's newest merger on July 1. When they unified, Vermont Public became the largest media organization in the state. Before moving to Vermont to lead VPR, Scott was the CEO, of West Virginia Public Broadcasting. He's also worked as a public radio news director. Thanks to both of you for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Since your stations are at very different stages of the merger process, we're going to discuss the specifics of what consolidation has enabled you to do or will enable you to do, along with some broader questions about when mergers will make sense and what it's like to navigate the process. Thank you to everyone who's joined the webinar. We want you to participate in the conversation as well, and I invite you to share your questions in the Q&A, and we're going to get to those soon. Kevin, I'm going to start off with some questions for you. The merger process is much more difficult than like the standard jargon and talking points that we hear about the benefits of reducing duplication and breaking down silos. Kevin, what are some of the myths that prevail about consolidation?
Myths? Oh, well. Well, one of the things I was just thinking about, Karen, is, the whole merger isn't really my story to tell as much as it is something I inherited, from my predecessor of Jerry Wareham and Kit Jensen, who just did a fantastic job of handing me a really kind of wonderful platform to work from. But I do think there are some myths that exist, from what I've learned from my experience with CPB and just my observations here at Ideastream. And I think the first one I've learned was that it's all about operational efficiencies. Part of my 30 years in public media, and as you mentioned, 7 of those years was at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. So essentially, I was there from 2007 to 2014. So right before the recession, the Great Recession, and right as the Great Recession was waning. And so essentially, my job was to manage the CSG program, but also to talk with stations about systemic issues that was impacting our system. And so when the Great Recession really became a bigger issue, one of the things I thought, and many of you have heard the thing of, never waste a crisis. Well, I thought there would be a lot of motivation during the Great Recession to think about mergers and consolidating operations. But I realized soon after talking with dozens of general managers, dozens of board chairs, that wasn't the motivation that was going to bring folks together. And what's interesting is I thought the general managers would be really the biggest issue to contend with, but I learned a lot from the board members that would essentially say, not on my watch. And I think the second myth I would put on the list is that proximity is king. The few stations that wanted, CPB to help them consider some sort of consolidation focused primarily on the physical aspects of bringing the operations under one roof. So in most cases, there was little thinking beyond the belief that if you could only bring people physically together, then wonderful collaborations would ensue. But needless to say, if this were true, the joint licensees would be the very model of a merger and collaborations, which I have to say that's not the case. And the third one I would say is that the mission will unite us all, and that is, I'm sure a lot of our audience here has gone through dozens of strat planning processes where you spend a lot of time, wordsmithing the vision and the mission, and you say, if we just get the mission statement correct, then that's going to bring everyone together. But although the mission statement, I would say, is important as the vision, that alone is not something that's going to bring stations or bring staff together.
I wanted to give everybody some background about what you had just alluded to with Jerry and Kit. WVIZ and WCPN came together as Ideastream, but continued to expand after that. You acquired WCLV, the classical station, and you added staff from the Ohio State House News Bureau to your roster. And right now you're exploring a partnership with WKSU in Kent, and also planning a statewide news collaboration with other Ohio stations. When we talked earlier before the webinar, you had described Ideastream's merger as a work in progress. And when you looked at the foundation that Jerry and Kit built over nearly 2 decades, what priorities did you set for continuing that work as CEO?
Well, as I said, I think Jerry and Kit, and I credit them as being my predecessors, because they worked together and they were both general managers of their own respective stations. From the very beginning, they have always said it's not about operational efficiencies, but about expanding services and creating better services for Northeast Ohioans. And I think that really did set the stage, not only for the staff, but also for the community to get behind them. So for me, it was a matter of understanding kind of what that foundation was, what equity did Ideastream, as a merged entity have in the community, and how can we build from there? One of the things that I think was really important for me to do is to think about, and I think this was quite fortunate in my case, because the digital aspect, where the DCA, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, had the Digital Culture Accelerator. And 3 months into my tenure at Ideastream, I was able to take advantage of that. And if there's one leveling playing field, I think digital is it, right? Because that's where everything can come together. And so I was able to utilize that to really think through, what does digital mean for Ideastream? And what does leadership need to know about what digital means to Ideastream? And we were on that journey together, quite frankly, over the next 2.5 years. And it has really proved to be helpful because, I think some of our leadership, they could decide for themselves if they wanted to be a part of this kind of transformation that needed to take place. Or they could self-select to say, I've done my time and I've done great work here. And therefore, I'm going to let others kind of lead the way. And it's pretty much worked out in that way, where some staff and our leadership team decided, this isn't for me in terms of what I think I can bring to the table to push things further along. But I think, what we were able to do and working with the Digital Culture Accelerator, just to establish some things to really bring the staff together in a collaborative way that's neither TV or radio, but just audio and video to create better products.
Can you give an example of how that works on an operational basis? Like, what was the decision that you made that enabled that to happen?
Yeah, there are probably a few things, but I guess the 2 things that come to mind is one of the pilot projects that came out of the Digital Culture Accelerator was what we call, it was a exclusive, not TV and not radio, video vignettes of entrepreneurs around the Northeast Ohio. And we're able to profile them and to really understand what does it mean to produce content in this way, and who's the target audience, and how are people going to consume it. And so that was one of the things that I think really kind of launched our thinking. And it really was a huge issue, benefit for us when we learned that we could get support for it. So one of the local foundations has underwritten that program for now going on 5 years. And so that's been significant. But the other major thing, I think, with existing content was the Sound of Ideas. The Sound of Ideas started out, and it's been a long-running radio program. Now it's radio, it's TV, and it's online. And so, and it's also a form of engagement because we take Sound of Ideas on the road. And yeah, there's a great picture of that where we did the West Side Market. West Side Market is like Eastern Market in DC and several other farmers markets that exist around the country, where there's a lot of community interest on what's working and what wasn't working with West Side Market. And a lot of, and you just see on the panel, there's people from the city of Cleveland and also managers of the venue and other patrons. So it was standing room only. We had to turn people away, and the conversation continues. And so I think this was a great testament to the power of the Sound of Ideas as being a great engagement as well as TV and radio content.
Scott, you're up next. We've got a couple questions for you. The VPR and Vermont PBS merger was in the works for several years. Why did it make sense for VPR and Vermont PBS to be under one roof? And are you literally going to be under one roof?
Someday. And by the way, I've got to give mad props to Kevin and Ideastream, and then also Kit and Jerry too, because we have leaned really heavily on your example. And literally, did the for 2 years, our board studied whether to do this or not. And the example from Ideastream was really, really salient. Not only was Ideastream able to serve its audience in all these new ways, but its revenues and audience grew faster than you would have expected. It accelerated after the merger. And so that was a really convincing case. And in the case of VPR and Vermont PBS, we have an issue that a lot of you have as well, which is we have a rapidly aging audience, especially on the TV side. We're losing our broadcast and cable audience to some degree. It's stable to going down. And we need to raise our game. Karen, as you said, I came from the newspaper world. I was a reporter. I watched the destruction of my industry happen in real time right in front of my eyes because the industry didn't innovate soon enough, quickly enough. In public media, we've been a little more fortunate in that the forces that destroyed the newspaper industry, it took them longer to get to us, but they're coming, they're here. And so we all need to raise our game. We need to build these new audiences while keeping our existing ones, while maintaining our financial and our human sustainability. I mean, that phrase is the strategic imperative for the merger and the first year of the new organization. And so we need to be able to do more. On the VPR side, we had certain strengths, really strong audience numbers per capita, really, really good revenues for per capita again. On the Vermont PBS side, a more broader, more diverse audience. This sounds familiar to all the PBS licensees out there. And also video capabilities, which VPR did not have. And we know if we're going to speak to these new, more diverse audiences, video is a key way of expressing yourself to reach that. And so that's the hope, that we can combine the strengths of both organizations to be able to reach these new audiences. And it can be done because it happened at Ideastream. It's happened at several of these joint licensees that came together. but it also doesn't have to happen that way. One last thing. West Virginia Public Broadcasting merged radio and 3 television stations into one during a recession in the early 90s.
Mhm.
I arrived there as CEO 20 years later, and there are still parts of the organization that never merged. A development had merged, admin had merged, but all the content was completely siloed and separate. And so we had to finish the merger when I was there in order to get the true benefits of being what Ideastream was from very early on, this multimedia platform, and to have all the benefits of the cross promotion. So it's not enough to be in the same building. Kevin's exactly right. It's a lot of work to bring the cultures together.
Just a question about sort of the financial aspects of a merger. I'm wondering whether the $56 million that Vermont PBS earned in the FCC Spectrum auction played a role in sort of changing the conversation about the merger.
Well, it certainly makes it easier when you have resources to do these things when you don't.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've been able to tap into some of those reserves to do things like, come up with a combined CRM. And so we're lucky that way. We're fortunate that way. And I know CPB, and Kevin can speak to this better than I can, has supported stations in the past because it does take that initial investment to be able to bring the stations together before they can benefit from the efficiencies.
VPR and Vermont PBS collaborated, I think it was in 2019, on a project called This Land, which was a series about life in rural Vermont. What did you learn from that collaboration that influenced your content strategies under the merger?
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, it was a huge success in terms of audience, on online digital reach. So this was basically, rural Vermont is changing, and it's also facing stressors that all rural communities, I'm sorry, not all, where many rural communities are facing across the country. And, we did a poll together, a public opinion poll. We had a series of live events that were storytelling, moth-like events where rural people told their stories. There's the results of the poll about how you feel about your community. And so there are parts of this that were hugely successful in terms of audience. The part, though, that was not successful, if I'm being honest, was that it took us a tremendous amount of energy and time to collaborate to do this together. And so one of the reasons why we actually chose to merge instead of just continuing to collaborate is because we learned the hard lesson that collaboration in some ways is harder in the long run because every single time 2 independent organizations come together to collaborate, you have to restart the negotiation. You do things differently, you have different ideas. There's a lot of energy that goes into that process of collaboration. And collaborations, sometimes they last for a long time, but sometimes they fall apart. And so we decided that it was actually going to be stronger for us to be able to just be one organization than to try to keep collaborating with each other on projects.
Thanks. Kevin, you mentioned your time at CPB and when you went during the Great Recession and worked to try to facilitate station mergers or get station managers to think about them. You said that you didn't really get a lot of traction at that time. How has the environment changed since then, from your perspective?
Oh, that's a great question, and I'm not sure if I can answer it fully. But what I can tell you is that I think digital has made a difference, and just starting to think about the digital landscape in the digital space and what it really means, to a station, because I think when you bring those forces together and those skills together, I think what's different from collaborating, as Scott was talking about, is you come together for a project. But I think what true collaboration will do is you get people thinking constantly and continuously about the things you can do and the things that you're currently doing, across platforms. And so I think it's moved away just from the economic imperative of what I thought would be the main motivator during the Great Recession. And it's moved more into a more comfortable understanding of how do we deliver a better product and a better service, because consumer habits, are really changing quite rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
And consumers are dictating really where public media needs to be. And so it's not a matter of us having a choice where 30, 40 years ago, it was just terrestrial broadcasting. And we said, well, if you want to watch our program or if you want to listen to our program, you need to be here at this time, to check it out. That's no longer the case. Consumers decide, and we have to decide to catch up. And I think that's what's making a big difference.
Scott, do you see the merger as accelerating the Vermont station's digital transformation?
It needs to. And I think that, we're not doing this for the efficiencies, but the efficiencies will help us to raise our game. And so here's an example. We estimate that we're going to save about 1.5 million on a $17 million annual budget over time. And we're not, by the way, we're not laying off any staff. It's not about that at all, but it's about things like no longer having two different audits, or being able to share space on the same tower together. So there are going to be things that we're going to be able to do that we estimate pretty confidently will save us money in the long run. Well, we're going to reinvest those savings. And the thing that we're reinvesting in is this sort of digital outreach to new, more diverse audiences. And our theory of the case is that since we're going to have these efficiencies, we'll be able to keep our existing audience while being able to build the new ones. And the new audience is going to be different from the old one. It's not going to just be more of the same. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're doing an audience segmentation study. And this is actually being funded by CPB. They were very excited to hear that we wanted to do this. And our audience study is going to not focus on our existing audience. It's going to focus on our not audience to try to figure out, why are you not watching? Why are you not listening? What do you really want from us that's within our mission and still serves your needs? What platforms do you need us to be on? How long is this content that you need? It's so many different questions, and as Kevin alluded to, it's so much more complicated than it was even 20 years ago. Kit has been helping with our merger, and at the time they were talking about radio and TV and online as the three platforms. I just had lunch with a young man who's a new reporter for us, and he's saying, you guys need to be on Instagram, and we don't need to be on TikTok every day, but we need to have something. And it's really like a dozen different major platforms. And so we're hoping that this will give us the resources and the scale to be able to play in these different platforms and to reach these new audiences.
Yeah, and I would just say that social media is really the bugaboo that we haven't cracked that nut yet, because, as we have learned, even to say social media platform, all the platforms are different and they're targeted to different audiences. And so you can't say TikTok is the same as Twitter, is the same as Facebook. You have to really decide who your target audience is going to be for a particular product or service. And I'm a huge proponent of what Scott just said in terms of audience segmentation. We completed ours almost about a year ago, and personas came out of that, and it really helped us to begin looking at how do we grow our audience and our users and our members and our support, because it's going to be important to not just know who your members are and who your current audience is, but who's the inclined audience and inclined support. And so I think for us, it's helped us with our strategies.
Here's a real practical question about mergers. And Scott, you may be in the best position to answer this, having just done it, but how much does it actually cost to do a merger when you add in like the legal fees and any consulting work that's part of it?
Well, it depends how you do it. And Kit Jensen asked me to tell you that the way that VPR and Vermont PBS did it was not the cheapest, most efficient way to do it. What we did is we had two independent nonprofits, and instead of merging one into the other, an acquisition type thing, because we wanted to show the world and ourselves that we're doing something new, we formed a new nonprofit. That's harder to do. And then, because this is a new nonprofit and because we do have some resources, we're taking the opportunity to not just like choose one or the other system between the two companies, but we're actually often choosing a new third thing that costs more money. So the best example for us is our CRM. We're in the process of not just like using one of the two CRMs. We're going to probably build out a new one because we're going to have to. Some people are going to have to change anyway. So why not take the opportunity to upgrade when you can? But that is not necessarily the only way you have to do it. And in some ways, we've made it much harder on ourselves. The easiest way would have been to basically just, bring two organizations together and pick the best of the two systems of the existing systems for each thing you have to choose. And in that case, I don't think the legal fees would be all that bad. $100,000 maybe. That's not the major cost. It's just how much consulting, how much help do you need to get there? And all in, I think our cost to merger was $500,000, but I think you could have done it for probably half of that. But if you're a station that's really struggling, like I've been at stations that don't have $500,000 or $250,000 to do for something like this, I do think that CPB is still interested in supporting this, and I would hope that maybe they could help for stations that are studying whether to do this, and for whom that $250,000 is the difference between being able to do it and not. But I'd defer to Kevin whether that's still the case.
Yeah, put me on the spot. No, I do think, I don't have the magic number, but we did a lot of analysis, and it depends, on if it's two radio stations, if it's TV and a radio station, because I'd say the biggest cost is system conversion, because as Scott said, at some point you have to make a decision of what system you're going to go with, and converting a system, whether it's membership, underwriting, or even your content management system, those are heavy lifts, and it requires some time, it requires expertise. You're probably going to have to hire some expertise to help you do that. Legal fees, probably not as much, but the fiscal aspect, if you create a new organization, then I would imagine the legal fees are going to be a lot more than if you have kind of existing bylaws that another station is going to adopt. Mm-hmm. And so, I would say anywhere from, all in, maybe from 250,000 to maybe 700,000 to 800,000.
It's a lot of money especially for the small stations that might be under more pressure to do it.
Yeah, it is, and that's why help is needed. As Scott was saying, there needs to be. We were able to get some help from a private foundation here locally to just start things. But yeah, I think the Corporation for Public Broadcasting was just essential in helping us just do the analysis that we needed to do, just to determine for ourselves that this was a good idea and that it can be done.
So I have a question for both of you, and it kind of gets to one of the questions that Abby Goldstein submitted. How are the different how are the different cultures of public TV and public radio an impediment to collaboration? And Abby wants to know sort of how you sort of break down those silos.
Well, that's a question for Scott.
I was going to say, Kevin, I think that has you written all over it.
I do think there are cultural differences between, in my 30 years in public media. I think there's differences in television. People who are hired into public television, people who are hired into public radio. I think there's a lot of things that contribute to that. I think radio stations are typically smaller budgets. And what I've noticed is that there's the one through line with public radio is a real passion for the mission, whether, depending on the genre, whether it's news and information, whether it's jazz or classical, they tend to skew toward, are you really passionate about the mission? I would say, and this is, of course, probably overgeneralizing, but I think for public television, it's more, you're hiring for more of the skills. Because usually you have your bigger budgets that you can hire maybe a chief marketing officer, or hire someone who may not have as much experience or direct connection with the mission, but they know their discipline in their profession, and so they can come in. And I think that creates a real difference my predecessor, Jerry Wareham, used to say, I think as a laugh line, that when he brought WVIZ and WCPN together, that the public radio people thought public television folks were shallow, and the public television folks thought the public radio folks were weird. And whether that is true, has some core truth to it or not, I don't know. But I do think there's some things that kind of divide that need to be taken into consideration when you're integrating culturally.
Yeah, there's definitely different ways that we've evolved, right? PBS for me growing up in Iowa was all about education. That's to me, it was about learning about the world, and the news part of Iowa Public Television was almost unknown to me. Whereas when I was finally introduced to public radio in college, it was through news. And I know that's not universally so. There are public radio stations that aren't around news, and there are public TV stations that do news well. But in general, public radio has gone down this news-focused path. Public television has been more broadly focused on culture, education, and public affairs writ large. And the biggest thing I've seen there is pacing is different. Not just the news folks, but everyone at VPR has just a faster metabolism, and things happen more quickly, and responses are expected more quickly. And that sometimes is a good thing, and that sometimes is a challenge, frankly. Sometimes a little more planning would be a good thing. Whereas on the PBS side, there are longer lead times. Documentaries can take a year, 2 years. And so there's a difference pace, and I think just the main thing I've tried to do, because look, I come from both sides. I was a news guy, but the other thing you might not know about me was that I was a teacher before I was a news guy, a sixth grade English and social studies teacher. And so I see the benefit of both cultures and the strengths of both. And what we're trying to do is to put people from both cultures together in situations where they can see the value of the other side, the talent of these video producers, how good they are at what they do. The understanding what it means to be in a newsroom. What is a newsroom? What are the pressures on reporters and other journalists? And hopefully out of that appreciation, we can take the best of both worlds and benefit from both sides. It is not easy, and it has to be very intentional work. As Kevin said, you can't just toss everybody into the same room together and expect it to magically happen. It's going to take a lot of time and work. But I think that if we're going to really have the benefit of the merger, we have to bring those cultures together.
And as Scott said, the newsroom changes everything. I think it's one of the hardest cultures to manage, but one of the more important, because it delivers that daily relevance and value every day. But I also think because of the rapid pace and just the constant need to kind of evaluate what you're doing, it creates a challenge that I think public media is really just trying to catch up to.
Well, Kevin, Ideastream has been planning a statewide news collaboration with Cincinnati Public Radio and WSU since 2019. How are those plans shaping up in a way that would somehow incorporate the TV side?
Yeah, well, the focus has been radio and digital. And that's kind of the primary focus in terms of the products and services. But, Ohio public media, including television and radio, have had a long time of working together. I mean, decades of working together. And we also cover the State House in Columbus, the capital. Mm-hmm. And so I think we have perhaps an advantage that some of the other state collaboratives did not have when they started, is that we had systems in place. We were already sharing content. We know each other. We were able to establish a relationship with the legislature and the executive branch, and we cover them, and they support us in terms of revenue. So, and that's not true in a lot of states. To the states that I've worked in, that just wasn't true. And so I think we were able to hit the ground running, but we still needed to, and we are in the process of determining how quickly we can bring products and services to the people of Ohio. Ohio is a hugely populated state, 11.6 million people. And so when you think about that, in terms of a Midwestern state, it's huge in comparison to all the other states around it. And so, in fact, you can combine several states and still not get to that number. So I think we are a great model, and it's going to be interesting to see how we can come together and really raise the quality of journalism from all parts of Ohio. And so we want everyone to be involved in terms of the radio public media licensees.
We have a few questions about audience growth, and I'd like to sort of put them both out to you to take on. The first is, can you both say more about, like, when you think about audience growth, are you serving more people within the same demographics, or are you looking to attract more diverse communities?
Well, I would say that I'll answer that question because I don't think Vermont has that many diverse communities.
Yeah.
But certainly we want to attract, and we're looking at how do we do that? You know, how do we, and the thing that we've settled on is that there are certain types of people in terms of psychographics that enjoy public media. And we believe that cuts across all demographics in terms of African American, Asian American, indigenous, you name it. We know that there are certain folks that really enjoy, what we do and want to create, and it's part of their quality of life. But I think it is not a good idea to just simply say, for example, we want to increase our African American audience by 12%. Because we just don't have the resources to make that happen. And quite frankly, not every African American is going to want to use our services. And for us, it's a great benefit because we have so many different services where we tend to super serve African Americans here in Northeast Ohio regarding our children's programming, which requires a lot of our real estate on from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And so we super serve them, and we are really kind of proud of that. And where we could use some more work is in public radio. We want to expand that audience, and also, maybe primetime public television as well.
So I'll just jump in and say a couple of things. One is I know you're kidding about Vermont. We do have a large number of white folk here. But to add to that, it is actually rapidly diversifying, and we see ourselves as hopefully helping to lead the conversation around that, so that it can happen in a more positive way. I say this a lot, that my daughter won't want to live in Vermont unless we are a more diverse, welcoming place. And I want my daughter to live here, and I want to live in a more diverse, welcoming place. So we see ourselves as leading that effort. The other thing is, how can I say it? To us, diversity also means diversity of thought, diversity of background. These are really, we're doing one small step with StoryCorps right now, which is all about bringing together people with diverse political and ideological beliefs to talk to each other. You'd be surprised at how much pushback I've gotten from our supporters for doing this, questioning, like, why do you want to talk to those other people? But we want to, public media was set up for everybody, and we have to keep pushing. I think we have it's difficult because we have two kind of different things going on. In terms of a business model for making money, if we were a commercial business, our traditional audience is really good for that. We attract underwriters by talking about the quality of our audience on radio, for example. What does that mean? Well, it's wealthier than average. They buy stuff, but that's not why public media was set up. Just to serve that one group of people. We need to serve the people that are also not as interested in us. And that might be too difficult to do. I think I'm just naive enough to hope that maybe we can open some of those doors, and we're gonna try to do that. And that means different audiences and maybe with different content than what we've been giving them before.
Well, this question very well might be for you too, Scott. How do you have a discussion with the public radio traditionalists about the benefit of multi-platform collaborations when they're sort of fearful that their skills of radio writing and audio production will be sidelined?
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, how do you get the audiovisual people to see that that their skills have applicability to the things you're looking for them to do in a different way?
Well, I do know that, increasingly the people that are joining us, who this is their first job, who are coming out of journalism programs oftentimes, for them, this isn't as much of an issue because they're naturally multimedia. They grew up making video. It's not, it's more of an issue for the folks that have been doing audio focused for a long time and really never picked up a camera. And to them, I would just say this is a great opportunity to learn and to grow. To Judith Smelser's question, and hey Judith, who's written some really good things about focus, that we have to focus what we do. I think that not everybody is going to do everything all the time. You're going to still need those audio specialists. You're still going to want people that do nothing but make an awesome podcast. And so not everybody is going to be video, audio, comic, graphic arts. You can't do everything. And you're going to have specialists still to this day. But at the end of the day, if we are only audio, if that's all we do here in Vermont, we know we'll only reach certain people that use that platform. No matter how great a job we do in audio, there's a natural limit to the number of people for whom audio is their preferred platform. And we have bigger ambitions. We'd like to reach more people. And so video is the more widely used and consumed way of reaching people online. Therefore, don't you want your stuff to get to the maximum number of people? I know when I was a journalist, that's what I wanted. And video does that.
Here's a question about like the process of mergers and actually making them happen. It was submitted by John Hess, and he pointed out that both of your organizations are community organizations, but there are a lot of states and cities where you have multiple signals in a market under one licensee, usually through a university. How do you help the university leadership understand the benefits of mergers and consolidations that could provide a better statewide service?
Well, I would say I think universities are finding it out for themselves. They are challenged these days on a number of fronts. The economic picture is changing very rapidly for university licensees. Here in Ohio, we have a lot of universities. I believe someone told me that a past governor said there should be a university within every 40 miles of every citizen, in Ohio. And I think that bears that out because there's a lot of competition. So that means there's a lot of competition for students from Ohio, but also from out of state. And they're starting to see that, their core business, which, tuition and providing a place for the students, is commanding so much of their time that this is probably a really good time to begin talking to administration officials about alternatives, how to continue to provide the community with the services. But perhaps there is a community licensee, or maybe even another university licensee that can help you do it more effectively.
Before we wrap, did you want to go?
Just real quick, I wanted to say what Kevin said about the hardest thing is often to getting these things to happen is often the board members.
Yeah.
And then I think down the list, staff resistance, and then next would be the CEOs. And I have to give a shout out to Holly Groshner, the former Vermont PBS CEO. She was visionary in helping to make this all happen. And you have to have somebody, because we talked about this for 30 years, but you have to have someone like Holly who's willing to really push to make it happen. That's the biggest barrier, and also the necessary thing. You have to have really strong relationships between the two boards, between the board and the staff, the board and the CEO, the two CEOs. It all has to align. And if anyone out there is thinking like, well, maybe we should do this now, I think one of the prerequisites is not just does it make sense in the abstract, but do I have the team in place, the board chairs, the CEOs, and the staff in place to make this happen, because your relationships will be tested. But once you get through that testing phase, there's this beautiful thing on the other side. You just have to make sure you're ready for it.
Do you think, given that there are like individuals who can sort of stubbornly, block a merger, that there needs to be some other mechanism to provide a carrot or a stick for those individuals to consider the possibilities of a merger?
Well, I think it is better service and expanded service, because it's not just that individual, it's how much more service can you provide the community? And what is your vision? I think your vision needs to be compelling, because ultimately that is what's going to sustain you, and that's what's going to help your support grow. And also it begins to really diminish those minority voices that may have emotional ties, say, to a certain call letters or just their time with a certain entity. And it just kind of forces, it changes the narrative from an emotional attachment to looking at the services that can be provided.
Before we wrap up with our final question, I want to make an announcement to everybody that our Local That Works contest is officially now open, and you're the first people to know. Local That Works is a contest that spotlights original and replicable local content, engagement, and revenue initiatives by public broadcasters and local independent media organizations. We're inviting submissions of the best examples of local media that engages new and diverse audiences and works to bring your community together. This year, there's a grand prize of $20,000 that's going to be awarded at a virtual gala this fall. And the deadline to submit your entry is at August the 23rd. You can submit your entries at current.org/LTW contest. And it looks like Julie has shared the link right there in the chat, so check it out. So we've covered a lot of ground here, Kevin and Scott, and there's a lot of complex questions to this process. I'd like to just kind of take a step back and ask you to share what advice you would give to a station leader who may be contemplating a merger. What would you tell them? Kevin, do you want to go first?
Sure. Well, I think one of the things that occurred to me in having inherited, the merger of WCPN and WVIZ, is really get the leadership in place, and also so that we are all on the same page collectively. I think that's really, really important, because if you have one, senior leader who is not does not see their role or does not see the importance of what you're trying to do, that's worth a lot of staff members who are in disagreement. And so for me, it was important for 2.5 years just to get the executive team together so that we all have the same kind of focus, collective vision of where we want it to go. And also it allows you to break down those silos that you hear so much about, but you don't really understand what it means because it becomes a bit abstract after a while. But for us, we have a general manager that is over all of our transmission assets for TV, radio, and the news information radio and classical radio. Whereas when I arrived, we had 3 station managers for each one. That within itself creates creates silos. We have chief content officer, like many stations do, that's over all of our content and not just TV versus radio. And all of our our C-suite and our executive team have a collective responsibilities of the whole organization and across platforms, and not they don't come to the table to advocate for one particular department or one particular medium.
Scott, would you like to answer this?
Yeah, I'll just add really quickly. Just ask for help. Be willing to ask for help is what got me through. I can't believe it. We're almost a year into the process before someone said, you know what, you need to talk to Kit Jensen, and then not only did we do that, but then we've actually hired her on retainer to be just be there for us. I can't tell you the number of times I've called her out of the blue and just said, this just happened. What the heck do I do next? And that was useful. Public media company worked with us for more than a year to do the business study. That was invaluable. They also led our board through the process of deciding whether to do this or not. Really strong leadership teams that were brought into the process about a year in advance of the announcement on both sides, PBS and VPR's leadership teams. Could not have done that without a lot of their help. And so and I can go on and on. I'm missing people. Nicole Ravlin, our board chair, and Marguerite Dibble, who's the former Vermont PBS board chair. They're in all the articles, are amazing women who put in hundreds of hours of their own time to do this thing. You need all those things to be in place. Otherwise, I don't know if we would have made it. So I don't mean to scare people off, but I think there's a reason why this is relatively rare. Like the stars really have to align. But when they do align, as Ideastream has shown, you can really raise the ability of service to serve your community in a way that you hadn't done before. And that's what we're hoping to be able to do now.
I would certainly second the public media company because, I don't think it's a scary thing. I think it's really energizing because you just learn a lot, and we've had an opportunity of working with them for several months.
Well, thanks to both of you. I really appreciate it. Your insights and experience are, hopefully really helpful to the people who joined us, because we know this can be a really difficult process. And I really appreciate that you're willing to talk candidly. It helps people make informed decisions. And that's what we try to do at Current for everybody who works in public media. I'd like to thank my colleagues Matthew Seklecki of American University School of Communication and Julie Drizzen of Current, who helped produce this event. We're going to post the webinar on our website so you can share it with your colleagues. I hope you found it useful and helpful. And we're going to be planning another webinar soon. It's going to be tied to our new reporting series on the money, which includes findings from our first ever salary survey. The coverage is featured in our latest print edition, and it has begun rolling out on our website. And very soon, we're going to be publishing a database of the survey results, so look for that. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your summer and stay well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.